Welcome to the future of higher education, rising to disruption. Thank you for joining this conversation. This session is part of Rising Economy Week, an immersive week-long virtual co-hosted event by the South Island Prosperity Partnership and the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. My name is Mark Lovick, Regional Vice President RBC for South Vancouver Island. We are proud to be a presenting sponsor of Rising Economy Week, as this aligns perfectly with RBC's purpose of helping clients thrive and communities prosper. It's my pleasure to introduce for this session Dave Obee, Editor-in-Chief and Publisher, Times Colonist. Dave Obee has been with the newspaper since 1997. Before returning to Victoria, he held management positions in other newspapers in British Columbia and Alberta. Dave is leading a transformation of the Times Colonist, including outsourced printing, moving the business offices, and opening a dedicated distribution center, as well as putting a greater emphasis on TC's digital presence. Dave has received several awards for journalism and community service, as well as an honorary law degree from the University of Victoria. He has written a dozen books, including the history of the Times Colonist. Welcome, Dave. I'll turn things over to you.
Great.
Enjoy the session, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks for everyone for being here. Post-secondary education is vital to the economic and social development of our entire community. COVID-19 has been both a disruptor of the status quo and a driver of innovation for colleges and universities. Our panelists today will explore how the pandemic is accelerating changes in post-secondary education and what the world of education will look like post-virus. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, Sherri Bell, the president of Camosun College. Throughout her career, Sherri has focused on engaging students in learning to find their passion and make a difference in their community and the world. Sherri believes colleges should be nimble and prepared to continually respond to opportunities that reflect our changing world. Sherri is also the board chair of the British Columbia Council for International Education, the chair of British Columbia Colleges, vice chair of the Trades Training Consortium BC, and she is a member of the Colleges and Institutes Canada board. Dr. Philip Steenkamp is the president and vice-chancellor of Royal Roads University. He is recognized as a galvanizing leader with broad experience in the public service and post-secondary sectors. Previously, he served as vice president, external relations at the University of British Columbia and at Simon Fraser University. Philip held senior leadership positions in provincial ministries over a 17-year career in public service. His roles in British Columbia included Deputy Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, Economic and Skills Development, and Advanced Education. In Ontario, he served as Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Training, Colleges, and Universities. Kevin Hall is the President and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Victoria. Kevin is known as an innovative academic leader and civil engineer with a strong commitment to community engagement and research excellence. Before UVic, Kevin's 35-year career is defined by his leadership in issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, access to education, and sustainability. He has held leadership roles at Queen's University, the University of Guelph, and most recently, the University of Newcastle in Australia. I'll begin with a few questions for our panelists. In about half an hour, we'll ask attendees to submit questions in the Zoom Q&A. This session is being recorded, and you can submit your question anonymously if you prefer. Please use the chat to interact and the Q&A to pose questions for the panelists. If possible, please use the Zoom chat and Q&A. The production team will monitor the Whova chat and Q&A for those joining us through the app. If you're posting your takeaways to social media, please use the hashtag Rising Economy Week 2020. Finally, I'll ask the panelists to limit their responses to about 2 to 3 minutes. If anyone has a question for one of the panelists, please direct it to a specific member of the panel, if at all possible. That way we get more questions asked in the same amount of time. First question is for Kevin. What is the biggest disruption you have seen in the past few months, and what have you learned from it?
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. Look, I think the biggest disruption from the student side, of course, is the way that we teach and the fact that we're not face-to-face for the most part. So students are, having to adapt their learning styles to online, or academics are having to adapt their teaching styles to online. And although it's been somewhat let's say a good journey, it hasn't been a perfect journey. We're starting to learn that some students are really struggling without having their colleagues to learn from. We've got all kinds of issues around assessment. How do we actually measure how well students are doing against certain performance targets? The old-fashioned exam, sitting around a room full of tables, answering exams at the same time, has disappeared from our lexicon. I think on the research side, the inability to get out there in the field, the inability to conduct human-based research, and certainly access to labs has been restricted. So that really impedes the progress of our researchers. And I think the third thing for me that really strikes home is the piece around inequality, that we always know that inequality is a big issue with learning at university, but the pandemic has really driven that home. And whether that's access to technology, having a good environment to learn in, different types of learning styles accommodating for that. I think this has really exacerbated, if you like, the inequality that exists across institutions that deliver education.
So the human interaction is a major issue there, but the inequality is every bit as important.
It's
for a lot of the students will be suffering because of that.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you happen to live in a rural and remote community that doesn't have access to to high-speed internet, that becomes problematic. If you don't have access to a computer and you're trying to learn on a mobile phone, that's a different scenario. So I think there's all these different things that compound the difficulty of providing a high-quality education in a pandemic era.
Sherri, it's harder for many college students to do online learning, given the hands-on instruction needed in the trades. What will the new normal look like?
Well, the normal right now is when you think of trades, you're right. You can't learn to be a carpenter without cutting wood, without having instruction in that hands-on way. So we have about 28% of our courses have a portion online. So if I use the carpentry example, many of our carpentry instructors will do the remote learning in the morning and then some hands-on in the afternoon, or they'll switch it up for one day remote, one day on campus, because you actually can't learn a trade, or for many of our applied programs such as health and some technologies, but certainly for trade. So that's the way it looks now. When I talk to students about what it'll look like in the future, the trade students certainly want to be 100% back on campus. And that isn't possible now. But I think, I think when we look at, because we are an applied institution, it may look a little bit different in the future because portions of it could remain remote. But our students, they miss the small classes and they certainly miss the relationship with their instructors and peers.
Okay, again, human interaction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Philip, what are the biggest threats ahead?
Well, I think it really depends on the institutions, but sort of more broadly, if you think about the 2008 recession and what happened to post-secondary education funding after that, I think worldwide we saw declines in post-secondary funding. So I think that is a challenge for all of us moving forward. There's going to be a huge debt to pay as a result of this pandemic. And there's going to be a lot of focus, obviously, on health spending moving forward. So we're going to have to make a strong argument that post-secondary should be and can be at the center of this economic recovery. In fact, can be a catalyst for this economic recovery. Because I think it will be tempting just to look at areas to cut. And I'm not speaking specifically about this jurisdiction. I'm speaking kind of more broadly. The other thing is, I think a number of institutions are going to face financial challenges. And we've already begun pre-pandemic to see some consolidation occurring. There's some very big players, for instance, in the online space right now, particularly in the United States. And speaking specifically for Royal Roads, where we've had 25 years of experience in online learning, although most of our learning is actually blended, it involves online and short-term immersive on-campus experiences, and a focus on applied and professional programs and professional masters in particular. A lot of people are moving into that space right now and becoming much more proficient in an area where we had a distinct advantage for a long time. So for us in particular, we need to think about how we stay ahead of the game here and how we truly stay on that kind of cutting edge of digital learning moving forward. So I think that's probably, overall, just that thread around funding and investment. And then I think particularly for smaller institutions, where do you fit? What is your unique value proposition moving forward? And some are going to succeed and some are going to fail.
Okay. The next question will be for Kevin, and it has to do with sort of the impact of the campus itself. I think of the transit routes that go to the campus, and how much of it is based on that. The people all around the campus who are renting rooms to students, et cetera, the restaurants, the bars, whatever, in that area. Has COVID-19 killed the campus as we know it?
I would say it hasn't killed the campus, Dave. It's certainly changed the way we run our campus. We're at about 3,000 students or so on or off campus every day compared to the 20,000 that we have. And I think, they're here for labs and things that are necessary to get their degrees. We're certainly not at a full complement of academic and staff on campus, so that has an impact. So it seems a little bit sparse, but I think, we pivoted really well to as much as we can online, but there certainly is a desire, I think, on behalf of both the workforce and the students to get back to campus. And interestingly, I came here October 31st from Australia. Gone through 2 semesters there. We were right in the middle of COVID when our first semester started in March. So the university pivoted instantaneously overnight to go online. So we had 1 term of online behind us. The students were happy with the quality of the online, but they certainly missed that face-to-face component. And so we were able to go back to face-to-face in our second semester because there was no COVID, where I happen to live in an area called the Hunter Valley. What came out of that was really interesting in that 70% of the students really said, we want to be back on campus. This is great. We're learning. But 30% said, you know what, we actually learn better online. Whatever the issue was, perhaps we're anxious, perhaps we just learn better online, perhaps we learn better at our own pace. And so I think universities, the challenge is going to be, we're going to be faced with a future that says, do we, where does this hybrid land, and how much do we deliver face to face? And how much do we have to still keep catering? Because at the end of the day, we want our students to, to learn in the best way that they learn. We want our academic staff to teach their courses in the way they feel comfortable for teaching. So I think the future becomes really uncertain because we're getting mixed messages out of what's going on right now. It works for some, it doesn't work for others. And that is reflective of what you see on the campus as well. So some people are adapting really well to a very sparse campus with very few services. And others are just really, wanting to get back to business. So I think that's a huge challenge for the sector going forward.
And then the fact is that nobody knows, nobody can say for sure what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next week or next year. Like in my time, going back many, many years in Victoria, I've seen sort of continual growth, continual expansion, new buildings, et cetera, at UVic. And I wonder how, is that sustainable? Or will it, or is this just a momentary blip in the great history of the university, that kind of thing?
Yeah, look, I actually think we're asking ourselves those very questions right now. I think it's not just for the university sector. I think if you look at the whole commercial sector, there's a lot of discussion around there. Do we really need 50,000 square foot in an office in a downtown area? Or, can we get away with 10,000 square feet and 3/4 of our workforce working at home? And I think as this pandemic progresses into next year, we're going to start getting a lot more clarity around the fact that we don't need the huge physical assets that we've had in the past. And having said that, I think, a lot of our students tell us it's really important to have this campus experience. They want to feel like they're part of something that is part of their education, but it's also a physical asset that they enjoy. They enjoy going to the physical education facilities. They enjoy the music auditoriums and the food services and that. So there is going to be these competing demands, but I do agree with you. We're really going to have to look at what is the right match of physical and digital assets in the future.
Now Royal Roads has the dream or the plan or whatever it is to expand with a new campus in Langford. So where does COVID leave that idea?
Yeah, Dave, it's actually a joint initiative with UVic and Camosun. We're looking at creating a West Shore campus to serve West Shore families out here. And we've been in discussion with government just recently. And in fact, Sherri and Kevin and I are meeting next week to talk about next steps here. We had a business case ready to go at the beginning of the year. That was obviously delayed because of COVID. We've got a signal now to resubmit that plan. But obviously, we now need to think about what we've learned over the last 9 months and how we might adapt the programming. I think we probably will be looking at much more of an emphasis on upskilling and reskilling, as well as the kind of undergraduate component. And importantly, what role could a campus like that play in reimagining the economy on the West Shore? You know, the economy on the West Shore is based in part on construction and big retail, and you know, it's quite clear that it needs to transform moving forward. And I think the pandemic's just accelerated those trends. So there's a very interesting discussion for the three of us to have and the three institutions to have about what role we could play in the kind of reimagination of the economy out here on the West Shore, and what sort of services we can give not only to high school students graduating, but also to adults who are looking to reskill and upskill. So I'm hoping there's actually a great opportunity for us to model something very interesting out here. We've also, the three of us have been working on micro-credentials too, which is a really important kind of new focus, I think, you know, because I guess we are also coming to the conclusion that coming out of pandemic, people are going to be looking at being able to get skills in a kind of shorter time frame for very specific purposes, and dip in and out of post-secondary education and build sort of stackable credits over time. So I'm very excited about the prospects here. And as I mentioned, we are looking to get together and kind of resubmit that business case to government.
Okay. So Sherri, how does Camosun connect with local businesses and industry?
Oh, well, we do that in a lot of different ways, but maybe one example I can give you is through a department called Camosun Innovates. So Camosun Innovates is the applied research part of our institution. And we connect with between 100 and 150 small to medium-sized businesses every year. We provide advanced manufacturing prototyping. So I'll give you some current pandemic examples. So when the pandemic started, there was a lack of face shields, PPE. And so we partnered with the plastics company in town and created a prototype for a flat stackable face shield that could be used locally and also across Canada. And because colleges don't have intellectual property, we could share that across the country with other colleges that had laser printers, which is what we used to create the prototype. And then when the company was ready to produce them themselves, they did. So we were producing thousands a week, and then the company took over and they were producing tens of thousands a week. Another pandemic example is, we're hearing a lot about the new vaccines. And so some of the vaccines have to be transported in very, very low temperatures. And so we've had a long time partnership with a cryogenics company in town, and we're working with them on a prototype to transport the vaccines. So we have very strong connections through Camosun Innovates, and of course through our co-op and internship programs. But the connection with local businesses is critical for us, as it is for Royal Roads and UVic. But it's also getting input into our program areas. So all three institutions have advisory committees that help us when we're redesigning and looking at our program areas. So for example, technology changes so rapidly. What are the local technology companies needing from our students? And being a college, we can pivot pretty quickly to provide the needs of the community. And Philip mentioned micro-credentials, and it's another area that the three of us will be working on. Again, directly responding to business and industry needs. What do people need now? And we can provide that in many different ways. And so we're all working individually on our micro-credentials, but we will have the beauty of the three institutions on the South Island is the partnership piece. We are really fortunate. We have great transfer credit opportunities for students. And we also, we're not in each other's space very much. So, UVic and Royal Roads are very different than Camosun. So we have three very distinctly different institutions that can provide the needs of the community and serve the needs of businesses in many different ways.
Yeah, there's a seamlessness that's very cool here.
There is, yeah.
And that everyone's working together. There's not competition. They're distinct sort of niches, not niches, but markets, whatever the word is that for each one. I mentioned, again, Sherri, I mentioned a few minutes ago about just how post-secondary education is so important in the community, and as an economic and social driver, basically. This will sound odd, but what can the community do right now to help the post-secondaries at this time?
That I haven't been asked that question before. I guess it's that keeping that connection that we have. So many of our students, our apprenticeship students in trades, our practicum students in health programs, our co-op students in business and other areas. It's that connection that we can keep giving our students, that practical experience. That part is so important for not just for colleges and universities, but also for the future of our industries, is to have those students have those placements. And, we all hear stories of co-op students that get hired on the spot because they're so good. So it gives businesses an opportunity to test our students out, and it gives our students such an important application for their learning. And I think, even if we're in a virtual world, there's pretty creative ways that we're still having those connections with the community and businesses. So I guess that's one, and the other is just input. When we're asking for people to sit on our advisory committees to give us input on what they need, that's another area that is critical for all three of us.
Okay, Kevin, with so much online these days, how do we compete for international students? Like it wasn't that long ago that I had conversations with people from all three institutions about how do we keep some of these international students here after they've graduated. Now, how do we get those students? I think becomes another issue. So what do we do for that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of challenges with that, Dave. I think, first of all, we've got to maintain a really high quality of online offering. That's absolutely essential. We have to make sure what we're doing is the best in the sector. Students overseas are absolutely shopping universities right now. There's a big expectation that universities will all drop, of course, their price point because everything's online. I've just experienced that myself in Newcastle, where I was in charge of all the international students at the university. And I think what we have to do is look at alternative delivery mechanisms for these students, because whether you're Canadian or you're international, chances are you still crave that personal contact and that face-to-face learning and teaching opportunities. And so I think we need to start looking at where, how do we partner in some of the countries that our students come from with other institutions that perhaps could offer our students an extracurricular face-to-face activity. And so certainly what we did at Newcastle is we got students together in a number of major China cities, and we gave them some classes on how to write a good CV, for example, or how to apply innovation to your degree, things that didn't count for credit. But I think we could start exploring how things like that will work, because my feeling is it's going to be a while before our international student notice is going to stabilize, and there will be a lot of competition from other countries like Australia, who are going through very aggressive price cutting within their own country. So I think it's that continual contact, is letting the students know that we really care about them, we care about their education, and that we're prepared to offer them, a very high quality online experience at this point in time, but that we're really hoping to get them back into Canada on campus as quickly as we can.
Okay. Philip, where do you see the greatest opportunities now?
Well, I do think, some of the trends that were in place pre-pandemic have significantly accelerated through the pandemic, and we've seen some of the fault lines as well. So to give you an example, I think this probably applies to my colleagues' institutions as well. Our admissions area came under a huge amount of pressure over the last few months. So it really forced us to look at how we were responding to students and the student administrative experience across the whole life cycle while they at a university. So I think the opportunity really is in that kind of personalized, customized experience for students. And the kind of digital transformation we all know is underway and we need to be part of. Again, the pandemic really sort of highlighted, I think, the importance of that and the importance of us being on that cutting edge in terms of kind of digital engagement. So I'm not one of those people who believe, and you'll see some of these really hyped, almost hysterical articles that, you know, this is the end of post-secondary as we know it. And, you know, we're going to see a switch from the analog degree focused on-campus experience to a completely kind of online digital experience, because I firmly believe, as my colleagues do, that the on-campus in-person experience is vital. And in fact, it's part of a life experience for so many students as well. But I do believe it is an inflection point. And I do believe, as Kevin was just saying, students are going to start shopping around more. They're going to look at they're going to look at price. They're going to look at the kind of value they get from education. So the opportunity for us really is to demonstrate that we are student-centric, we're student-focused, and that we've got the platforms to kind of do that. And there's some great examples around the world. I know some Australian examples. Deakin University has an amazing little AI-informed student virtual assistant, and something I'm very jealous of and would love to have. And I'm sure Kevin has other examples out there. So I think there's big opportunity there. And then some areas we've already mentioned. Microcredentials, I think a huge opportunity there. But we have to be sensible about microcredentials. I heard about a microcredential that was being offered the other day about somebody offering a microcredential and how to do nasal swabs for COVID. That is not a microcredential. That should just be workforce training, right? So we have to be sensible about what microcredentials are, but there is an opportunity there. And I think we can do a lot more around really responding, as Sherri mentioned, to what industry needs, what students need, what people looking to upskill and reskill need. So being much more flexible, much more adaptive, and much more responsive as we move forward. That's the opportunity.
Okay, we're starting to get questions in from attendees. So I've got one that I'll give to all three of you. If you can just briefly comment if you feel the urge. What advice or tools would you give to an upcoming international student that would help him or her to success in the next year? What can your students be thankful that you offer from the rest of the institutions? Those two questions. Anyone?
Look, I'm happy to kick that off. If it's a student writing the question from overseas, I would say, you know, first of all, the high quality of the online offering, the sort of the mentoring, the availability of mental health counseling that we offer to all of our students in both an online and in-person format. Those are things, you know, to look after the student. But I actually, you know, one of the things that I think has become very apparent in this panel discussion and in my early conversations with Sherri and Philip is I think we have a very unique situation on the island here, that we have three institutions that aren't in competition, that are actually working together to create various enabling pathways for the students, to create opportunities that you know, we can offer as a collective, as opposed to what an individual university, a big university, might offer. And I think that will be very attractive to international students to know that you know, whether they sign up for one of the three universities, they've actually got access into the technology, the learnings, the courses, the curriculum from all three of our institutions. And I think if we really let students know that, that's going to be very attractive for this area and for students to come to this area.
Maybe I'll jump in here too. And I think if it was advice to a student, I'd say talk to another student. Talk to someone who's been to Victoria and lived. Talk to a student that's attended whichever post-secondary institution they want to attend, and ask the questions that are important to them. Of course, the quality of the education is first and foremost, but when you're that far from home, one of the things that we've noticed with our international students, we had 1,400 students actually stay, which surprised us. But the only reason we knew that is because we contacted them each personally. And that brought us a lot of information that we wouldn't have normally had, because over the summer we wouldn't have normally contacted each and every of our international students. And we found that you know, some of them were doing well, some of them were struggling because they were away from their families. And so we had to put in place supports for those students. Those supports came in a variety of different formats, from showing up at their apartment with from our culinary arts program, pre-cooked meals and donations for meals and recipes. It became quite a creative endeavor in knowing the individual students and what their needs are. It's really difficult as a young person being that far from your family during a pandemic. And, you know, again, the only way you know is by asking questions. So for a future student, do your homework and ask other people. Email the president, see what happens then.
Okay. Philip, any thoughts?
Well, I arrived here as an international student in 1984 in Ontario, actually, from Botswana. And I remember being in Kapuskasing for my first Christmas. It was minus 45 degrees. It was plus 45 in Botswana at the time. So my advice would be sort of check out the weather where you come. Victoria has the best weather in Canada. Never rains here, as Kevin knows, as Kevin's been told. That's how we got him here. But seriously, one thing I would add too is notwithstanding some of the uptick we've seen in COVID cases recently and some of the new restrictions in place, this is a jurisdiction which has handled public health issues extremely well. It's a very safe jurisdiction for international students as well. It's a very welcoming jurisdiction. And we seriously take our commitment to inclusion. All of us here take our commitment to inclusion very, very seriously. So there's a welcoming environment for students coming in. And as Sherri and Kevin have said, fabulous high quality programs in a very dynamic region.
Okay, thank you. A reminder, if anyone wants to ask a question, go to the Zoom Q&A, please, and write it out. I have another one from one of the attendees. And again, this goes to all of the leaders here. How do you feel about prioritizing our post-secondary institutions to pivot to community commercialization centers to bring more innovation forward, basically large-scale business incubators? For example, when do we consider adding a chief entrepreneur to the leadership team?
This sounds like a question for Kevin.
Yeah, David, look at this as something that has been a passion of mine for, well, since I've been a young academic many, many years ago. I've been involved in a number of businesses and startups, and I've tried to introduce that into the universities where I've lived and worked. I think it's an absolutely critical function of the outreach of a university, and not just for its students and academic staff, but actually for the community at large. And certainly what I hope to do with the university here and also with Philip and Sherri is build a network of innovation hubs across the region, because I think it's then you connect deeply with the existing businesses. All existing businesses could use a touch of innovation to actually, help them become more competitive. And then there's also the new ideas and the way you pivot your business. And so a little bit of entrepreneurship and innovation goes a long way. So the coexistence, if you like, of university students, university academic staff, community businesses, community members I think is really critical to that deep integration of higher education into a community. And it's not always about business and making money. It's also about driving social change. We've got so many social issues to deal with as a society in Canada, and that, getting, again, the community together to look at the innovation on the social agenda is critical, and that can all be done through a very targeted series of innovation networks around the region, so that we don't miss out on different groups.
Maybe I just add a comment here, and back to the West Shore proposal, which includes the proposal for the inclusion of an innovation center in this new campus. And Sherri and I are very excited that Kevin, with his background and experience, will be able to give us advice about how to proceed on that. But one other point, a lot of our curriculum is challenge-based curriculum. So we work on real problems, whether they business problems or social problems. Our students work with local businesses to, as an example, we've been working with a local brewery to look at how they can introduce green practices across the entire production line. We've been working with a small forest company to look at increasing kind of value-added sort of product. We work with local government and the fire department on wildfire urban interface issues. We all do this. So I think it is built in, that kind of entrepreneurial culture is built in, but giving it more focus, as the questioner suggests, I think is a good idea. And I think we've got a great opportunity to do that.
And I think that the question, it's a great question, because we all are doing that. My example before with Camosun Innovates and the kinds of businesses that that department connects with, what the question tells me is what we're doing is not known. Maybe we have to do a better job telling the story of what we do around innovation, and also the story of how we involve our students in that work. As both Philip and Kevin have said, that's a key. We have faculty and staff involved in our innovation centers, but we also have students, and that's the future for our local businesses. So my takeaway is that we've got to do a better job telling the story.
That's interesting, because one of the questions that's come in is how do we find out more about the mask template and the cryogenics for vaccines, that kind of thing. So I guess that could be a cue for the Times Colonist to do more coverage of Camosun.
Oh, exactly. Thank you, Dave.
But I'll never repeat that one. Anyway, but it's a good point, because there's so much interesting stuff happening here at all three institutions that the public needs to be more aware of. There's a lot of really cool research happening and projects that make a difference. And I think it's important that we all get across the notion that just how valuable the post-secondary institutions are to the entire community. Someone else is asking for a definition of a micro-credential. I think, Philip, you were the first person to mention micro-credentials, so.
No, Sherri's way better placed than me.
This is one I think we'll pass back and forth, because there are probably, I don't know how many different definitions there are for micro-credentials. And we were talking yesterday about, is there a definition, a working definition we can use? But I think in a nutshell, and thanks a lot, Philip, for passing this one to me. If you take a credential, so at a college, a credential is a certificate, diploma, and a degree or a post-degree diploma. Those are the credentials that we have. And if you take, let's say, a certificate and you pull it apart into different chunks of learning, and that's a micro-credential. So we're just starting we've just been approved by government and received some funding on it with a clean energy micro-credential. So you can take a certain amount of time in, like if you unit it, just take X amount of units in, boy, I'm not doing a good job explaining this, in the credential, and you can ladder them and stack them into another credential. So it's a piece of learning that someone can come back to school, take, and be, get a micro-credential in whatever that is. And they typically stack into something larger, like clean energy or sustainable building, that type of thing.
Sherri,
Right.
Sherri, you did a remarkable job of explaining a micro-credential, but the question is really important, because the key challenge is there's no common definition of micro-credential.
No,
and we have to get there. Ontario's done some really interesting work on building a framework. In BC, I think we really have to turn our attention to common definitions, because otherwise it's very difficult to kind of make sure that those credentials are recognized and that students have something they can take with them as they move around. We've all been funded just in the last couple of days to pursue various initiatives. We have two projects. Sherri mentioned some of the ones they have. One of ours is leading projects in a digital environment, and the other is workplace communication skills. So that gives you a sort of flavor for what the micro-credentials are like. But it is, as Sherri said, it's that competency kind of broken down. I do think there's a really interesting, as I mentioned, a really interesting opportunity here for all of us.
Dave, just to add to the confusion, this is a global problem. Nobody has a global definition of a micro-credential. It's kind of like building a wall with Lego. And it depends on what size the Lego blocks are, how quickly you build the wall. My past university in Australia once had an associate vice president teaching and learning who was an engineer that said, well, micro-credentials are easy. They're 6-hour blocks. So any bit of 6-hour learning becomes a micro-credential. If you do 6 of them, you get 1 course, and then you keep stacking your courses together. That person was in the job for the first couple of years I was there. And then the second couple of years, we had a teaching and learning associate vice president who was from the arts. Their definition was, well, anything that you actually take and learn. It could be 30 minutes here on the weekend doing something. It could be watching something online. It could be, getting into the classroom for 3 hours, and you actually want to assimilate and build all of these things towards a recognized credential. And I just think it is a discussion that is going to continue for a long, long time. And at some point in time, we as universities and colleges have to either decide on a definition, or perhaps even the ministry needs to show some leadership in this space and go, you know what, we recognize that micro-credentialing is important, but here's what we want to use as a definition. So I think there's this discussion that has to occur over the next year or so. But it's an important part, I think, of enabling pathways into university, because one of my concerns is we're missing out 65% of the population that don't get to go to college or university. And so how can we enable those people to get into universities? And that might not just be, kids in high school or kids that dropped out of high school. It's actually, the 30 and 40-year-olds that might have dropped out of high school for whatever reason. But because of COVID and because of the way the new economy is going to move, how do we get them into the business of higher education? And that may be the ticket, is to decide on what this micro-credential is, so people can study part-time at home, they can study part-time while they're working, and build that ability to come into the higher education system and get the degree that they need for the future generation of work.
Yeah, and something that will help down the road. One of the comments just now was to make sure that these micro-credentials are in tune with the needs of industry, basically, to make sure there's a market for it. And I've had another question here. What actions, now something has popped up on top of the screen. What actions are being made to offer micro-credentials as well as degree programs shared between specialized colleges as well as traditional university programs, so that a student or business can fine-tune education to their particular needs? So it's kind of fuzzy what the definition might be, but now we have to take it to the next level here. What actions are being taken to make these possible?
I think that we're starting to have those conversations, and it's important that we continue to do that between the 3 institutions and industry businesses that are local, along with the Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training. They, ultimately they need to be brought into the conversation as well. So I think we're on a path.
Yeah, I would say just internally, Dave, we've over the last probably 5-6 months, we have developed a framework for micro-credentials for us. But as Sherri indicated, the next actions are really for us collectively to get together and talk about common definitions and common approaches. And I think we do, as Kevin suggested, we do need some leadership probably from government on this. But throughout, right from the beginning, my staff told me, my faculty told me, these will only succeed if we work in partnership, in close partnership with industry and business and community groups, because that's the whole point of them.
I think also, Dave, most of us, we have advisory groups for a lot of our programs on our campuses. And so we use those advisory groups as a kind of sounding board for, here's the curriculum. What do you think's missing? What could be added? So there is that continual interaction, I guess, if you like, between the higher education providers and the industries and businesses and social areas that they service with graduates.
And one comment just came in that this could also be done through continuing education, continuing studies programs, which are offered. It's another way to get the training out there.
Absolutely, very suitable for micro-credentials.
Yeah. What sort of role, another question from one of the attendees, what sort of role do you think there is for local governments in supporting the innovation and collaboration you've been talking about? Could we assist by bringing stakeholders together, or are there other conditions or things we can be doing to provide support?
I personally just believe it's absolutely critical for all the regional governments to get deeply engaged and involved with the universities and colleges to actually drive innovation. It's just not about business and industry. It is about it's about branding the region, the city. It's about creating good business conditions to bring new businesses in. It's about looking for opportunities that are unique perhaps in the country. One of the things I've come into Victoria not really knowing the area very well, but it seems an area that's really built on sustainability. It's built on being clean. And so, you know, some clean energy or clean businesses like medical technologies, you know, how do we kind of make Victoria and the region around here, the Canadian hub, if you like, the Waterloo equivalent with the software business, you know, could sit here in Victoria. And I think with our three institutions working together, we could really work with the local governments to define what that one thing could be that we could really drive very hard and very quickly here in the Victoria area to really make it successful. And government's critical to that.
Yeah, just one example again, back to the West Shore proposal, and Sherri will be familiar with this, as prior to Kevin's time, but we worked on those proposals jointly with the local governments on the West Shore. And in fact, they were the big drivers of the proposal, really. So there's a really important understanding out here that the future of the economy out here really depends on post-secondary. I think there's a huge opportunity here on the West Shore, as there is in Victoria and in the region generally. And you look at regions which have been successful and which have survived, you know, and thrived, notwithstanding recessions and all of that. And a common feature always is strong post-secondary institutions.
Absolutely. Another question from one of the attendees: what best practices have you developed to help your faculty succeed in the transition to online education where it didn't previously exist?
Well, we all kind of turned that switch overnight and we moved from face-to-face to remote learning so quickly. And, you know, I hats off to all faculty at all three institutions that had to make that giant leap, you know, virtually overnight. And it's not ideal to implement in that kind of way, but we were forced to do that. We all have centers for teaching and learning, and those individuals that supported faculty did an incredible job. We had to add a little bit more staffing in there to keep up with it. But the support that we saw there, and for one another, somebody would learn to do something and teach somebody else. The stories were quite remarkable. The other aspect of that is the support for students. So, you know, the services, you know, counseling, advising, all of those supports also went remote. And what we have found at Camosun is the group that is supporting students have learned that some of the ways that they're working now are actually better than before. So they can service students in a more expedient way. We weren't doing a lot of phone calls and virtual counseling and advising, and we are now. And I think that when we start reflecting to what worked this year and what didn't, we'll be keeping some of the practices that we've learned, and then others will be modifying. But you know, the support to move to online, we definitely didn't have enough support. And I really feel for our faculty that are still learning how to keep improving their practice as they move to remote learning, because it's not the same. The teaching part is not the same from being face-to-face to actually wanting to captivate your group. And students struggle. And I've talked to a lot of instructors that are concerned about individual students, and it's not the same as looking at them across the room and walking over and saying, how are you doing? So there's been a lot, but we have remarkable people that work in our institutions.
Yeah, maybe add to that, Sherri, that teaching and learning has certainly been important. We've engaged some students to help with the teaching and learning, and I think the other piece is peer-to-peer learning has become much more important. And so how do you connect different students or student groups together to help study together in an online format? So really working on the peer-to-peer piece has been critical. And obviously technology plays a part in that. So, making an investment in the appropriate technology. As Sherri said, it's not perfect. This is very much a learning curve, but it's been a tremendous effort by, not only the teaching and learning staff, but also by all of the academic staff at our institutions to really pivot in the way that they deliver things. The last piece I think that we haven't unlocked the full answer to yet is the assessment. We all do assessments, and then the old classic style, it was an examination for a big chunk of the course, tutorials perhaps, things like that. And I think this is really going to be the huge challenge going forward, is how do we stop the student fatigue and the teacher fatigue that goes with the online delivery, but also with the assessment of the students as to how they're traveling compared to the outcomes we desire in their learning.
If I could just make a quick comment here, we've had, we were lucky in the sense that we'd had 25 years experience in online, so we didn't face the same challenges as the other institutions. We did have to move our in-person residencies online, and those are full-day immersive residencies over a 2-week period. So that was our challenge. But we did offer our assistance to institutions across the country, and a number of them did take us up on that. In fact, I worked with my alma mater, Queen's University, and we eventually, in fact, put in place programming through our professional and continuing studies in online learning, which we are now offering to institutions across the country. But we have learned things as well. As Kevin was saying, there's certain nuts we still have to crack. And I think the student experience by and large has been very good. The quality's been very good, but it is uneven in places. But everybody has done a remarkable job. I mean, if you decided to do this, it would have taken you months and years, and yet we did it in a matter of days and weeks.
Which is a win for everybody, basically.
Yeah.
So, it's seeing an incredible, unprecedented challenge and rising up to that challenge, and all three institutions did that very well. So, something to be proud of. Final question, and we're almost out of time. So, final question, and it's probably a bit of a personal question. What's the book you're reading right now, or the one that has changed your life? One of you have read a book lately, right?
Reading, what's that? I'll tell you a book that I read recently. It's called Leadership Matters by the former president of Stanford University. And I'm not a big fan of management books, to be honest. I just don't like the jargon and all of that. I think the best management books were written by Shakespeare, King Lear and stories like that. They tell you everything you need to know about leadership. But this one was so wonderfully personal, and it was a set of, it was built around, a number of chapters built around a set of values which were important to a leader, illustrated with stories about time at Stanford and also time in the private sector. And I just found it, and it was short, and I love short books. So that for me was kind of inspirational, because I thought, here's the president of Stanford, going through similar challenges to all of us. And I found it very inspirational and very encouraging.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a plug to SIP. So I was on a session yesterday with a local fellow, and I ordered his book. I haven't started reading it, but his talk yesterday afternoon was really good, and it was called Lead, Care, Win, I think. And so I ordered the book, and I thought I could connect with what he was saying about people. Lead, Care, Win by Dan. There it is. Somebody put it in. But you know, what I liked about the book, it was very positive, and it was things that as a leader, you know, taking care of your people is important, and you know that you have to be authentic and being out and about. And so a lot of what he had to say was true to me anyways. And I just thought, yeah, now I want to read the book. So I did place an order for that.
Great.
But I am reading a novel that is called Giver of Stars. And it's about a group of women that, it's a true story, that were pack horse librarians. Literature to me is so important for little children, for adolescents, and for adults. And these women in Carolina or Kentucky or somewhere would go up in the hills and deliver books to people that lived in remote areas. So it's been a bit of an inspiration for literature.
Great. And Kevin, 30 seconds.
Well, I've been reading hundreds of books about British Columbia, of course, trying to learn all about my new province. But I've been reading the book of Antiquities and Science, which is a book about Australian Indigenous history, and actually the application of Indigenous knowledge to today's problems and solutions. It's actually riveting a read. It actually is so cool to look at how the land has been stewarded and the passing down of knowledge and how it actually applies to today's things like COVID. And it's a terrific book.
Great.